Jakub, that I'm going to talk about, is not the military rabbi in a late imperial Russian army and briefly military rabbi in the Autonomous Republic of Ukraine, and then a political and religious figure in Palestine and Israel. It's the communist leader of post-World War II Poland, and his younger brother Adolf, who was a left-wing Zionist, in fact, fellow member of Coalition Left, to which Emanuel Ringelblum belonged before the war. And when Paul asked me if I would speak on the subject, I actually had a lot of mixed feelings. To what extent the case of those two brothers who went in different political directions and also geographically. Adolf died in Tel Aviv, Jakub is buried in Warsaw. To what extent this is a case for Polish-Jewish relations, to what extent this is possibly a case for political options and political choices of a certain milieu of Polish Jews in interwar and post-war years, maybe a certain window into the attempt to build New Poland or to enter into kind of liberal, welcoming Polishness that Professor Kassow mentioned. To what extent this is about a story about Jews who were involved in the project of building a better utopian world, whether in Poland or in Israel. And in fact, Marcy Shore, who wrote a wonderful article on the Berman brothers in Jewish social studies, titled her article, The Children of the Revolution. And it's the Marxist revolution, but also Zionist revolution, or the new vision for the Jews that Adolf Berman represented. They came from, as you can see, not a Hasidic family, at least not their parents, rather middle-class Jewish family in Warsaw. The father was a Zionist. He wrote Hebrew poems. He was a merchant, well-to-do, although not upper middle class. He was a member of the group that supported revival of Hebrew. His wife, Guta, was not politically active, and in memories of their children, out of 5 children, they had 3 sons and 2 daughters. In the memories of those that survived, 1 son and 1 daughter were killed in a Shoah, as well as the father who was killed in Treblinka. The mother died before the war. They remember that house as that family, as again, we heard about it in a previous lecture, somewhere between Polish, Yiddish, and Russian culture and languages. By the time the youngest of the 5 children, Irena, who died relatively recently in 2000 in Warsaw, by the time she was growing up, she was already proud to remember that they spoke pure Polish without any accent, without Yiddish accent. So the family was, in terms of culture, and we heard about this embracing of Polish culture, was definitely moving in that direction. The children were also making political choices. The oldest of the 3 boys was a Coalition right, kind of left-wing but not Marxist Coalition member. Jakub, the second of the sons, started his political involvement with left-wing Zionist sympathies, but then moved to become a communist. Adolf state a Marxist Zionist, really until the very end of his life. This younger sister was killed. She wasn't politically involved, was killed with her husband and her daughter in Treblinka. Now here, the two brothers, if I can just, this is Adolf and this is Jakub, are marching through the rubble of the Warsaw Ghetto. I'm not entirely sure if Professor Internet is right, if this is in fact April 45, but it's early on, one of the earlier, probably commemorative meetings of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And here they come together, and I want to explore the degree to which they came together and the degree to which their differences illustrated tensions in the story of Polish Jews and of Polish-Jewish relations. And if you haven't heard about Jakub Berman, in fact, I checked, there is no Wikipedia in Hebrew on Jakub Berman. There is one on Adolf. But if you check in Polish, there is a lengthy Wikipedia article on Jakub. And in fact, unlimited number of references to Jakub Berman as the person representing Stalinist, the worst Stalinist years of the communist takeover, the person who shaped early post-war years, who was influential and who fell out of grace only in 1957. So I want to first talk very, very briefly about each one of them separately and then raise some questions. All 5 children of Isidor and Guta Berman went to university. Jakub studied law, received a degree, and decided not to practice. He was already as a student politically active and a member of the communist youth organization. Later on, became a member of KPP, the Polish Communist Party, which was at this point illegal in Poland. So he was working in the political underground. Adolf studied at Warsaw University as well. He studied pedagogical studies, psychology, and history. Was very active as a social activist on behalf of the Jewish community, involved with Centos, with the Organization for the Care of Jewish Orphans. He organized very progressive new vocational counseling, especially in Warsaw. And this is part of the bigger question, again, Professor Kassow mentioned that, the question of economic restructuring of Polish Jews, how the community can create a feasible economic future for 3.5 million Polish Jews who are going through radical impoverishment, especially in the late 90s and late 20s, I'm sorry, and early 30s. So Berman is involved with that. He has a name already as a communal activist. He also has a PhD from Warsaw University, but there is no chance for him for university appointment as a Jew, but also there are simply no positions to fill in the 30s. So his work is within the Jewish community and as active member of Poale Zion Links. He writes, he edits, he counsels, and he stays in Warsaw when the war begins. Here, I presume he's this gentleman in a hat in the second row. early months of the occupation, at the funeral of theater activists, and there are many theater people here in the picture. In the Warsaw Ghetto, he continues working for Centos, caring for increasing number of Jewish orphans, homeless children who lost their parents, children of people who were forcibly moved to the Warsaw Ghetto. He works together with his wife, Basia Berman, and that attempt to help the Jews in need, to work on their behalf, continues all the way until the Great Deportation in the summer of 1942. But Berman is also a political person. He continues to be involved in political activities on the left side of political activism in the Warsaw Ghetto. He joins with other left-wing Zionists from Dror, Hashomer HaTzair, in creating the anti-fascist bloc in Warsaw Ghetto. And in the summer of 1942, himself escaping miraculously from Umschlagplatz, together with his wife, they decide to cross over to the Aryan side and to hide on the Aryan side with false identity papers. This is Basia's ID with a fake name. He had also fake papers, but they don't hide as private people. They hide also to be active as representatives of Jews still in the ghetto. And he seems to have strong points. He has, as a left-wing man, he has contacts, and he seeks contacts, both with the Home Army and with the emerging communist underground. Marek Edelman, years later, who was the second commander of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and the Bund leader before and during the war, many years later, Edelman said that Berman was a fool because you can't dance at two weddings. And Berman indeed was dancing at two weddings. You can say that as a member of Palei Zion Links, he was dancing at two weddings. He was trying to bring together Marxist revolution and Zionism. But to his mind, this was the only right path to what he called proletarian Zionism rather than bourgeois Zionism. And to his mind, this was also the best way to represent the Jews in Warsaw Ghetto, to try to seek ways both to the mainstream Home Army delegatura, political representative of the government in London, but also to the left wing. He was accused of being a Soviet spy, an accusation that I think is basically a slander. He was working out of idealism, and I think that there was a practical aspect to this as well, because as again we heard in the previous lecture, the Home Army had a very ambivalent relationship with Jewish underground and with the idea of assisting Jews and Jewish armed resistance, among others. So Berman meets with Władysław Bartoszewski regularly. Bartoszewski doesn't ask him about his contacts with the communists. He suspects, but he prefers not to ask the question that would be then difficult for Berman to answer. And Berman is sitting on this very important crossroad, connecting between the Jewish National Council in the ghetto and the Polish government in exile representatives, and also connecting the Legatura and Żegota network with a Jewish fighting organization, with Job in the ghetto, and developing connections again with the Home National Council, which will then become the communist Moscow-backed government in Lublin. As a member of Żegota, as a secretary, a very important member of Żegota, he is moving around Warsaw. He's said to have the so-called good looks. I don't know if it's the funny mustache, but he is a lot outside, bringing funds, connecting between people, connecting between people and new hiding places if the apartments are, as it was said, burned, no longer safe. And he's arrested. One case that his wife describes in her diary, Basia Temkin Bermanova, she describes how in January of 1944, he's approached by people on the street who greet him by his name. They know who he is. And he's taken to the police station, and it seems that this is over. Now, Berman's arrest would be not only tragic for him, but for all the contacts that he was holding. But the policemen, in the end, these are Polish policemen, accept money in return for his release. And Żegota pays astronomical amount of money to have him released, but from that point on, it's not safe for him to be that much underground as this Adam Borowski, as he was known in his fake papers, outside. He fights in the Warsaw Uprising in the fall of 1944, and when the uprising is over, he emerges from Warsaw to take position, very important positions, in a post-war rebuilding of Jewish communal life. This is just to give you a sense of what we, I think, all know. The scope of Jewish losses in Poland is one of the highest. I think it's right after the Baltic states. And there's an ongoing discussion of how many Jews survived in Nazi-occupied Poland. There are more precise numbers for those that would return from the Soviet Union, those that were deported or who escaped in the early days of the Nazi German attack against the Soviet Union. So somewhere between 60,000, which I think is low, to 120,000, let's take that number, escaped death and were emerging from hiding places, from Aryan side, from forest, from partisan units. Some will be returning from death marches or following death marches from concentration camps. This is not only New Poland by the fact that Jewish community became a tiny group of survivors. This is New Poland in terms of political borders. The Curzon line that the Communist Party in Poland actually supported throughout the 1920s and 1930s, claiming that the eastern territories where Poles were not, ethnic Poles were not a majority except for large towns, and that not even a vast majority, that they belong to, they should be Ukrainian, Belarusian, Lithuanian, Soviet republics. Now it becomes actual political reality. So in that context, Berman emerges as one of the few, not just survivors, but one of the few leaders with known names and experience in political and communal activism on a so-called Jewish street. Here he is with Yaakov Witkin of the Kfar Witkin, visiting Warsaw. I think they're inspecting some kind of a German military tank, yeah, left, I guess, from the Warsaw uprising. And in fact, there will be people, Jews, many of whom came from Poland, who had left Poland in the 20s and 30s for Palestine, for America, will be visiting, will be coming, and Berman is, Adolf Berman is going to be their contact, their person on a Jewish street. Now, Berman becomes vice president of the institution that is crucial to understanding post-war Jewish life in Poland, especially the immediate post-war period, the first five or so years. For Jewish survivors, those that come out of hiding, return from the camps, but also those that will be returning from the Soviet Union, some of them from close, from former Galicia, from the Kresy, from the borderlands, just across the new border, and some of them from deep in Kazakhstan, as my grandparents, they share a lot of similar concerns. And the Central Committee of the Jews in Poland, which is an institution of, I would say, mixed origin. It is grassroots, but it also has the blessing of the new communist-dominated government, which I think blesses it out of self-interest, not necessarily out of some kind of overwhelming empathy for the Jews, because the committee takes over the activities on behalf of very needy population tiny, but in need of everything. I remember looking through the files of the Central Committee of the Jews in Poland in 45, 46, and they discuss, individual cases of so-and-so needs fake teeth, and so-and-so needs a pair of shoes for her teenage son, and so-and-so needs some kind of medication, and so-and-so needs is asking for a prayer book. Anything from teeth to religious items, everything is needed. So the committee, first in Lublin and then transferred to Warsaw, takes on those multiple tasks. And Berman participates, really organizes a lot of those activities. He is here all the way to the left. I'm assuming that these must be people who represent Joint, who gave money to a lot of those institutions. It was late at night and I gave up on identifying them, but if you can identify, I would be grateful. Otwock, just outside of Warsaw, is one of the several orphanages that the Central Committee of Jews in Poland organizes. Not all children in them are actual orphans. Many parents who are single parents, there are very few families who survive with a set of both parents. It's a lot of women who are left with a child or two children. So they give those children to those orphanages because often it's easier to simply feed them and make sure that they're taken care of in those initial months after liberation. Now, the committee is not really involved with religious issues. For those, the communist-dominated government allows for recreating the pre-war kehilot, the religious communities, but in Second Polish Republic, religious communities were responsible for everything. Now, in the emerging communist Poland, they are focusing, they're given the mandate to just do the religious stuff. So, organize a mikvah, organize kosher food, organized religious school, but the rest is done by the Central Committee. This is actually, does it say so? This is from Dzierżoniów, from Niederschlesia, from Lower Silesia, where most of the Jews repatriated from the Soviet Union settle, many of them for what turns out to be a very brief period of time. Now, Berman, as part of the political establishment of the Central Committee of Jews in Poland, which has a spectrum of all political parties that are allowed to be active again, which, if you think about it, in Poland of 1945, 46, 47, is pretty exceptional, pretty unusual. The only two parties that are not given a mandate to be again legal are the revisionists, the right-wing Zionists, and Aguda. They're not really seen as in positive light by the communist government, but truthfully they're not seen in too of a positive light by left-wing and Marxist Zionists either. And they find their way to be active through Jewish religious communities. But political life is quite vibrant. It's a discussion to what extent this is a kind of a balloon. Antek Zuckerman, Itzhak Zuckerman, who was active in a Jewish underground, yes, and he's here. He was said to have a real good looks to be on the Aryan side. He was liaison of the Jewish Fighting Organization on the Aryan side of Warsaw, in very close cooperation with Adolf Berman during the Nazi occupation, and also a member of the Central Committee of the Jews in Poland on behalf of Jewish Fighting Organization, which did not disband immediately with the end of the war. So Zuckerman actually wrote in his memoir that Poaleksion Links, the left side of Poaleksion, was pathetic party because they were talking in the name of the Jewish masses when the Jewish masses were gone. And I think that points to a certain built-in tragedy of Adolf Berman's political milieu. On the other hand, we can say that in comparison with right-wing or even general Zionists, he spoke the same political language as the communists. He talked about proletariat and the working class, working masses, and talked about the real cooperation during the war between the working class, radical working class Poles and Jews who fought together against the Nazis. I don't think it was some kind of a cynical use of a language that would pass well, that would sound good in a political context of Poland in 1946 or 7. This was his ideology before and during the war. And some more images from political meetings. The Central Committee of the Jews in Poland, this is for the few of you who don't read Polish, this is a poster for a meeting protesting against Polish Jews, protesting against the events taking place in Palestine. This is the British, the time of the conflict in Mandate Palestine. And if you look at the names of the speakers, they are Adolf Berman, Zuckerman, who interestingly still has his name from the underground in parentheses, and 2 Jewish communists. But these are the communists, unlike Jacob Berman, to whom I will come back. These are Jewish communists who are working within the Jewish community, rather than people who are born Jews who are working for the general communist cause. Another important aspect of communal activism that brought together Jews from many political parties and groups of the post-war survivors community was the issue of commemoration. This is a delegation to the site of the Helmno death camp. Another site, there are images like this from Treblinka. And here, a fascinating image, although it looks kind of like one of many. This is the commemoration of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, 3 years anniversary of the uprising. And in the Presidium, you recognize the mustache, this is Berman, and this is Władysław Bartoszewski, whom Professor Kassow mentioned. Bartoszewski, who was a member of the Home Army, an officer in the Home Army, part of the government in exile political network in German-occupied Warsaw, who, and other members of Żegota, Polish non-Jewish members of Żegota are here as well. They came together briefly after the war on matters that had to do with fighting anti-Semitism. Bartoszewski was trying to set up, independent of communist propaganda, a league to fight anti-Semitism in the wake of Kielce pogrom. He was active in commemorating Warsaw Ghetto Uprising at the time when commemoration of Warsaw Uprising of the fall of 1944 was absolutely banned. And there is an account that when Bartoszewski comes to the Central Committee of the Jews in Warsaw, Basia Berman, who is then very pregnant with future professor of psychology in Israel, Emanuel Berman, comes to meet him. And they hug and they embrace Adolf and Basia and Bartoszewski. And Berman, the Marxist, the Zionist Marxist, but Marxist, asks him, what he wants to do, how he sees his political future. What political future can he hope for? He can only hope not to be arrested, and he will be arrested several times. And then Berman offers him a position in the Central Committee of the Jews in Poland. And Bartoszewski says, well, I'm not Jewish, I don't know Yiddish, makes no sense, and it would look like I'm getting paid in a way for my, my work during the war. But it shows, I think, the very complex relationships, personal relationships between people from very different political camps at the time. Here is another image of Berman at the time of commemorating Warsaw Ghetto. Here he's on a mission to collect money for what will become the very famous Nathan Rapaport's memorial to the heroes of Warsaw Ghetto. They're visiting Rapaport's studio in Paris, and you'll recognize one of the figures that will be part of the memorial. The memorial is erected, unveiled in April 1944. This is in a way a high point. 48. That's why I bring PowerPoint. This is the high point, as it would seem, in that revival, rebuilding of Jewish life in post-war Poland, of course, with one important accent in the opposite direction of the summer 46, of Kielce pogrom, and the wave of flight from Poland that follows it for a year after Kielce, with the tacit agreement of the communist government. I mean, it's very clear that Jakub Berman must have agreed to opening the borders to Jews who wanted to cross them on the way to Czechoslovakia and then to the DP camps, and then half-half Palestine and the US, with some people that went to South America, Australia, stayed in Germany, or went to France. And that is one of the big questions for Adolf Berman and for Polish Jews sometime between 46, 47, 48, 49, to stay or to go. Adolf Berman stays for a relatively long time. He leaves with his wife for Israel in 1950. He doesn't leave immediately after the Kielce pogrom. Antek is long gone when Berman arrives in Israel. And he continues to be a man of left side of the political party. He is a member of the Knesset on behalf of Mapam, but then joins the left section of it, refuses to condemn Czechoslovakia for Slansky's trials, and then he's a member of the Communist Party. He also remains very closely connected with Poland, organizes evenings for Stefan Żeromski. You haven't probably read him, or you should, for Polish poets, for Polish literature, for Polish history, that kind of embracing of Polish culture, that for him, Basia dies very prematurely in 1953, but before she dies, she's trying to set up a federation to disseminate Polish culture in Israel, and writes about it to Polish consulate to be helped, because half of Israel speaks Polish and there is a shortage of Polish literature. Sadly, these books are all to be found in garbage areas in the last years, when that generation is passing away and their children are not really reading Polish literature. But they remain loyal to the choice of left-wing Zionism, and they remain very closely linked to Poland, to a very particular Poland, to that good, liberal, welcoming, open Poland that they, to some extent, experienced working with Żegota, working with Bartoszewski during the war. Now let's go to the bad Berman brother. Jakub is a fascinating figure. He is said to be one of the few, if not the only, Jewish members of the Communist Party in Poland who received parties okay for having a chuppah when he was getting married. He's said to have an arrangement with his father, who would warn him that they were coming, his parents were coming to visit Berman and his wife during Pesach, so that they could hide the bread. The father knew that the bread is in the house, but he didn't want to see it. So Berman, the communist, would hide the bread for his father's visits. Now, of course, there is this question that I think is a very tense one for Jews. I would argue that for Jews, after the war, in those post-war years, Berman was not really a Jew. And despite the fact that he was and remains a Jew for Poles, and I didn't want to traumatize you with images that come up when you put in Google image Jakub Berman, the kind of visual anti-Semitic drawings that you can imagine, probably. So he's somewhere split between this person who went to the other side and somebody who remained a symbol of Jewish, well, again, we mentioned collaboration in the context of the Soviet occupation, who not just collaborated with this new regime brought on Soviet tanks in 1944-45, but who created that regime, who was responsible for two most important aspects of it, almost ironically. He was shaping the security, political security apparatus, involved in political trials, definitely knew that people like Bartoszewski, involved in assisting Jews during the war, risking his life, were sitting in jail, and also shaping communist proletarian culture in those 1950s. Now, ironically, it didn't make the Jews to feel any safer to have him responsible for the political apparatus of the country. But he is, again, perceived in a very schizophrenic way, depending whom you ask. Oh, this was supposed to be his speech praising the anniversary of the Pravda communist newspaper. Do we have a minute?
Yeah.
It's a short one, just so that you get a sense of his... No. That's why I sent it to you.
Let's see if I can... All right, so you know what we can do is we can send you, it's very short, but I will forward to all of you. If you send me an email, I will forward to all of you the link. It's very short, it's showing him speaking, and it's nice to actually see him animated.
Speaking, and then a standing ovation of people clapping hands. Polish. But, and again, this is him appearing in a very public context, you know, representing the new authorities. Again, I understand you're not entirely sure about what this ID is about, but the number, exactly, the number is important.
Wow.
He carries number 2 of the Central Committee of the United Workers, Communist Workers Party, after PPS that was working with Bund in the 20s and 30s was forced to unite with the communist PPR in 1947. PPS. Now I just want to, this is not a cousin, I just want to show you an image as an example of what I would argue is this whole generation of young Polish Jews in the 30s, coming of age during the Second Polish Republic. This one was actually born in Smorgon, in the borderlands, not in Warsaw, coming often from Yiddish-speaking homes, attracted to Polish culture, attracted to Polish language, attracted to Polish universities. He studied at Warsaw University as well, and who were attracted to left-wing politics. Shulkin will become a communist around the same time as Jakub Berman was already a member of KPP. This is his CV. I simply did some research on him, and he was so committed that he came in 1945 from Palestine. He found himself during the war in Russia, and then in Palestine, and forced his wife, who had come with an earlier immigration wave from Poland with her parents, to pack up a newly born baby and go from Palestine to Poland to build this new world, this new, better, just utopia that was emerging. So it's much more, I think, than a very important, different perspective that Jews and Poles. I have always a certain uneasiness about saying Jews and Poles because it assumes that there is an unbreachable divide. But let's assume for now, for Jews and Poles in 1944, 1945, Russian tanks rolling through Grodzisk Mazowiecki, where Berman and Zuckerman and Edelman were liberated, meant something else. It goes beyond it. For that milieu of people that were somewhere between Jakub and Adolf Berman, there was a whole question of lifelong allegiance to radical, revolutionary, left-wing politics. And their fates were tragic. Berman died in Warsaw, Jakub died in Warsaw a believer in Marx. Being removed from the party in 1957 didn't change him. The anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic campaign in 1968 didn't change him. He remained a believer, although he also was very clear about being born a Jew. So this was not somebody who tried to hide it away or ashamed of it. Adolf died a communist Zionist in Tel Aviv. Many of those people who are here, I believe that this must be probably around the 60s, who were communist Jews or Jews communists. Many of them left in '68, some of them as not young people. Some of them rethought their allegiance, some of them didn't, but it's part of the Polish-Jewish narrative that I think needs to be discussed and remembered for all its complexity.